Hi, it's Laura from Reading 18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Today I'll be talking about books. This is part 2 of my January 2023 recap, for which I have decided to separate out the book discussion since I think it might go even longer and ramblier than it usually does, because I have some things to say about the books that I read in January. So, I looked at some statistics from Storygraph, which I love reviewing books on. And of the 9 books that I read in January, they make a total of 2,697 pages of reading, and I gave an average star rating of 3.78. So not bad, not off to a bad start reading in 2023. Of those 9 books, 3 of them I read with book clubs. 1 of them was a buddy read, and 5 of them I read by myself. That does actually probably make it sound like I read more than I did in January, since one of the books, in fact one of the longer books, I had actually started in December and just didn't get to finish. So some of those 2,697 pages were actually read in December, but Storygraph counts them based on when you finish the book. So that is where I'm at with that. In terms of the themes or moods of the books that I was reading, Storygraph tells me that they are all over the place, and that is absolutely accurate. Most of them are fiction, though not all. Most of the fiction are fantasy, though not all exclusively fantasy, and the lengths of the books were also all over the place. So 3.78 as the average star rating is, I think, the most interesting of those statistics. On Goodreads, I just use, they just have a 5-star system where there's no 0.5 stars or anything like that. Whereas Storygraph allows 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75 of a star as well, which can sometimes be kind of so granular that it stops being useful, but I do make use of the 0.5s for sure. So, without further ado, I thought I would start with the book club books. And I'm going to put some links below, including the links to the Patreons that I am a patron of, that the 3 book clubs that I'm currently reading with are attached to. All 3 of these book clubs are monthly, 1 book per month. And so it's fun because I can easily kind of jump in or jump out depending on if the book that particular month is one I'm interested in reading. But this month I read for all 3 book clubs that I'm currently participating in. So the first book that I'll mention that I read was with Seji, the Artisan Geek's book club, which is on Patreon, linked below. And that was Giorgio Di Maria's The 20 Days of Turin. And I feel like I might have suggested this book to go on the poll without thinking that it would get picked. But I had wanted to read The 20 Days of Turin. And Seji's book club is really focused on classics, and particularly diverse and international classics. So a lot of the picks are books that are in translation. And 20 Days of Turin is an Italian book written in the 1970s, 1975, I think. And it is a bit of a kind of cult classic now, I think. And it follows a narrator who is going to Turin to investigate a series of violent and kind of unexplained, mysterious incidents that had occurred in Turin, quite a number of years prior. And so he goes to Turin to investigate this, and he's particularly interested in investigating the relationship between these acts of violence and an institution that used to exist in Turin called the library. And the library was a place where people could write down and deposit their writings, about their life, about their thoughts, about their secrets, anything really, and other people could go and read them. And that it, ostensibly it has been shut down, right? And so the narrator is interested in this and what this has to do with these strange happenings that had occurred. And it's a hard book to talk about without giving spoilers. But I will say, it is a creepy, creepy book. Very disturbing. It's not at all gory or body horror heavy or anything like that. I feel like the description of this book has the capacity to put people off because it sounds like it's going to be really kind of viscerally gross in ways that it actually really is not. It's a very kind of psychological and suspenseful build-up kind of a book, and it just gets certain things in the book, just it keeps getting stranger and stranger and further from what you started in thinking was actually going on. And it happens so gradually and so it is done so cleverly that you don't even really notice how bizarre it has gotten until it's like very far from where it started. So it was so good. I feel like if I was going to compare it to anything, I would say that I could compare it perhaps to this Census Taker by China Miéville a little bit, in that it's this kind of very nebulous and mysterious, and like it doesn't really tell you everything that's going on. I intend to compliment both books in making that comparison. It's very strange, 20 Days of Turin. And I really, really liked it. And it really got under my skin. And I was thinking about it for days. And I texted my brother after I read it. And I was just like, brother of mine, have you read this? And he said, no, I've never even heard of this. And I said, go get it. Go pick it up because you will be really into this. And he's read some of the books that we've read in the Artisan Geeks book club too. The Blind Owl was one, and a couple of others. And it's like he's into some of the same books as I am, and we certainly have overlapping taste, and this would be a place where it would be overlapping taste, so I was excited to recommend that. I thought that I would just share a couple of quotes that I wrote in my Page a Day book from the 20 Days of Turin, where they're talking about the library, which is how people would write things and then other people would read them at this library, right? And so I have two quotes that are describing it that I think are relevant, we'll say, right? So on page 36 he writes, if the library needed true documents, it hardly mattered much to dwell on the structure. The pen could scribble freely whatever the spirit dictated, and once it started it was hard to stop. The prospect of being read quivered in the distance like an enchanting mirage. A mirage as real nonetheless as the realities that were written down. And then it goes on a little bit later, still talking about the library and what the creators of the library did. And it says, they helped to furnish the illusion of a relationship with the outside world. A dismal cop-out, nourished and centralized by a scornful power bent only on keeping people in their state of continuous isolation. The inventors of the library knew their trade well. A place to write down one's musings that other people can read them and react to them, as creating the illusion of a relationship with the outside world. I think there are parallels in this book to certain contemporary realities that are very interesting. So 20 Days of Turin by Giorgio Di Maria. Definite recommend. On Goodreads and Storygraph, I write content warnings with all of my reviews. This one is nowhere near, as content warnings heavy as the description makes it sound like it would be. It's really not. And I take that seriously. So it's a good book. It's really worth checking out. The next one, book club book that I want to talk about, I read with my friend Corvin, who folks will know of Tail Raven Tarot, who is also hosting a book club, and I'm going to link their Patreon below where you can find their book club. And our first book that we read for the book club is Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. And this one, I don't want to say too much about what I actually think about this book because we are still in the process of scheduling our book club meeting. And I want to keep some of my thoughts for that conversation. And I'm sure maybe sometimes my thoughts are like changed a little bit after a book club conversation. I'm sure other people will have gotten different things from the book than I did. But I will say Thistlefoot was a book that I was really excited that Corvin chose because it's a fantasy book with an aspect of kind of folklore retelling. Thistlefoot is very much rooted in Jewish folklore and history as well. And it has a Baba Yaga connection in the story. And it was a book that I had never heard of. It was a contemporary fantasy book, you know, with folkloric aspects that I had never heard of until Corvin picked it for this group. And so I was really happy that it was picked because it was something that I would have picked myself off of a shelf if I saw it, or based on its description that I would have picked. And basically the book follows two siblings who inherit a house which walks on chicken legs. And the house comes to be named Thistlefoot, and that's the title of the book. And, you know, again, I'm not going to plot spoiler it, but certainly, you know, there's a lot of interesting things throughout the book about where Thistlefoot came from and what Thistlefoot has seen, and the contemporary siblings' relationship with their roots and their heritage and their ancestors, including the ancestor that they inherit, you know, this house from. And there are, you know, themes of kind of generational knowledge and generational trauma in this book that I thought were handled really well. And I really liked how, I'll say, this is not really a spoiler because you learn this pretty early in the book. The book has multiple points of view, and it alternates points of view, which I like, and I really like in a fantasy book in general. But one of the points of view is the house. And I really, really liked the chapters where the point of view was the house. I thought that they were the best part of the book. Really, really liked that. So I'm looking forward to chatting about that book with Corvin and friends in a Zoom chat soon. The third book club book I read was with Katie Flowers, who folks will also know. Katie Flowers has a Patreon book club. I will put it below as well. And we read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, Legends and Lattes seems to be like a very popular book, described as cozy fantasy or high fantasy with low stakes, following a main character who, you know, she is a orc and she gives up her adventuring to open a coffee shop. And so the whole book is about the coffee shop and the process of opening the coffee shop, constructing the menu of the coffee shop, protecting the coffee shop from an antagonist who does, you know, there is a plot, there is an antagonist, and there is a climax. You know, it's not just coffee drinking for the entire book, though it is for much of it. And, you know, it read like, and I said this in our book club chat, because somebody I've played Dungeons and Dragons with was in that book club chat too. It reads like a Dungeons and Dragons session where you avoid the conflict that was set up for you to fight in and instead like go do something else, which we had done once, completely avoided the fight we were supposed to go in and just went cloak shopping for like hours. That's what this book reads like to me. It was cute. It was nice. I liked it. The author has another book coming out that's going to be in the same universe but with different characters and a different like the same, I think, city, but a different, like, it's not set in the coffee shop. It's a different kind of scene of action, we'll say. Yeah, and it was good. I just thought the thing that bugged me about this as a high fantasy book, Legends and Lattes, was that the book could have been 95% the same and not fantasy at all, and just followed somebody who got either disillusioned with or came to ethically be uncomfortable with whatever their profession was, so they decided to say fuck it and go start a coffee shop. And then all of their friends helped them, and it was cozy and happy, and friendship is magical. You know, like that's what this book felt like to me. You know, the side characters were interesting, but you didn't really get a lot of backstory, which I wish that you did. You know, I will say that Travis Baldree, the author, I think wrote a book with not necessarily a predominantly female cast, but certainly like with main characters who are predominantly female, none of whom felt remotely gender stereotyped or in any way, you know, problematically depicted in that way. And that I will express appreciation for. I'll read the other book that he's working on now. But I wanted more fantasy for Legends and Lattes. I wanted more fantasy, I will say. So those are my book club books. I also buddy read Journey Through the Gaian Tarot by Joanna Powell Colbert with my friend Sarah of Waterchild Tarot. And I'm going to link below Sarah's January recap because she talks about her thoughts about this book. And I would say that for the most part, my thoughts about this book and Sarah's thoughts about this book are very similar. I really like the structure of this book. For each card, you get a description of the artwork, a meaning in the reading, potential reversal meaning, some like bullet pointed kind of list of themes, specific symbols in the card, journal questions, and then affirmation. That's for the majors. And then for the minors, you get a meaning, a reversed meaning, an affirmation, and a description of the art. So you don't get the specific symbols described in quite the same level of detail. I feel like there was definitely occasionally some problematic comments in this book. Sarah speaks to them pretty clearly in her discussion of the book. Some of the choices are a bit odd to me, I'll say. I do really like that the guidebook really details the artwork in the deck, and I love the deck. I love the Gaian Tarot deck more than I love this book. More than I love this book. But I do think that the journal questions are nice in the majors. I think some of them, they get a little bit too focused on the deck's artwork more than the card itself. So like, how might yoga benefit my life as a question to journal about if the Hanged Man comes up feels like a little bit weird to me. Like, I'm never going to pick that journal question. Sorry. You know, but I like how the cards are explained for the most part, with some exceptions that Sarah talks about. And I like the spreads at the end. Joanna includes several spreads, including spreads by other people that she includes like with credit, obviously. So I'm looking forward to a reading swap with Sarah at some point using the spreads in this book. We both really like this deck. So I really enjoyed buddy reading this one. Mixed thoughts about the book. I do wonder if Joanna rewrote or kind of revised this now. I think that there would be some changes. I do, for the better. So maybe, you know, I hope that happens. I do. I hope that happens. Next up are the 5 books I read that were not book clubs or buddy reads, just books I read myself. The book that I had mentioned that I had read starting in December was Africa Risen, New Era of Speculative Fiction, which is an edited anthology edited by Cherie Renee Thomas, Ogunnachola Donald-Ipeki, and Zelda Knight. And I got this one as a advanced reader copy. I have read some other books edited by I think 2 out of the 3 of the people who edited this one before. So it is a collection of speculative fiction short stories written by African authors and authors of African diaspora. And this was really good. And I will say, I read another short story anthology that Ogunnachola Donald Ipeki edited, and I thought that one was really good as well. Really, really tightly well edited collection. There's a range of science fiction and fantasy. Some of the short stories are really short, some of them are substantially longer. Inevitably, with a book like this, anyone I think is probably going to like some stories more than others. Certainly I did. There were a couple, 2 I think, that I actually decided to bypass for contents warnings related reasons, particularly having to do with sexual violence and violence against women, that just, very quickly became very clear to me that I was not going to want to read those. So I did skip 2, but I read the rest, and overall really solid. I gave this book 4 stars, I think, which is high for me for an anthology, because usually in any anthology of short stories like this, there'll be some great ones, some medium ones, some and some shit. and sorry, that's usually what happens, at least in my experience. But this one, there was a lot of great ones and some medium ones, and then a couple that I skipped for mostly personal reasons, and that was it. Like there was none that I would say were absolutely positively terrible. I will say that, at least 1 out of the 2 that I skipped for content warning related reasons, I also didn't think handled the content very well, and that was problematic. But I thought the collection overall was really, really solid, and I would definitely recommend it. Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction. I read a short novel called The Border Keeper by Kirsten Hall. I think this book came out last year. It had been on my TBR for a time anyway, and I was looking for something a bit shorter to read since I had read quite a bit of longer books in January. And this one was weird. This one was weirder than 20 Days of Turin, possibly. I'm not sure. There was a lot going on in The Border Keeper, and it kind of centers around a character who is a kind of border keeper figure between worlds. There is a kind of aspect of traveling between different kind of planes, like not necessarily physically, but having your consciousness go into a different place that was interesting. I definitely think there's aspects of kind of new, weird kind of sensibilities to this book. This was a lot more violent than I expected it to be, I will say, based on the description. This one is definitely the most body horror heavy of all of the books I read in January. So it was good. I thought it was good. I was a bit taken aback by the contents, though. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to spoil it. I know that I do these book discussions and people go and add things to their TBR, and I don't want to wreck anything, and it's a very hard one to talk about. I will just say, like, based on the book description of The Border Keeper, you would not be prepared for the level of gross out that is in some parts of this book, and that if you're squeamish, that it's not for you. But otherwise, I liked it, and I'm not too bothered by that. So it was interesting. I would read something else by Kirsten Hall in a second based on this. Really well written, I think. I just finished fantasy novel, The City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I have been really liking Adrian Tchaikovsky lately. He is fairly new to me, though not new as an author per se. He's written a ton. I have read 3 books before this by Adrian Tchaikovsky, the first 2 in a sci-fi trilogy. The third one is not out yet. and also a science fictional novella. And The City of Last Chances, which I just finished, is a fantasy. And I really liked this. It focuses on a city that has been, and when is being, in the course of the text, is colonially occupied by a outside force that is aggressively expansionary and trying to bring its particular perspective of perfection, and that's the language used in the book, to other places forcibly. And so the city in the book, which is called the City of Last Chances as a kind of nickname, I guess, in the book is occupied by this Palestine occupying authority with a series of different interrelated institutions that govern different areas, like that censor the arts, that determine what can be taught in schools, that determine right use of language, that police people's behavior, that try to eliminate different small local religious traditions and things like this. And it's a very it's colonial occupation. It's violent, right? And so the book follows a bunch of different kind of factions in this city, and some of those are the different occupying institutions and figures within those institutions, and then others of those are kind of resistance groups and different resistance groups that are kind of springing out of different subsections of the city's population. So there's like the sibling Rees are like the labor unions. There's some different kind of something akin to like an organized crime section. There are students who are kind of becoming politically active, opposing this occupation. There are different figures, I guess, in the city. And something that's interesting about the city as well is that it is a kind of portal is the wrong word. The city is beside a portal of sorts that leads to a bunch of other worlds, right? And of course, this has something to do with why this aggressively expansionist colonial society, colonizing society, wants to have this city, because it's the gateway to all of these other places, right? To also be expanded into and taken over. And so the book follows this kind of maneuvering of all of these different groups, trying to move against each other in different kinds of ways. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of point of view characters. It is the kind of book that comes with, thank goodness, a list of characters at the front because you lose track without that. I'm sure that probably in the paperback or hard copy form, I had an ebook, that it will probably come with a map of some sort as well. Really ambitious, really big scale. The city was really interesting. A little bit like Perdido Street Station boss lag vibes from the city. I thought somebody else who wrote a review of this book mentioned that too. Like it felt a little bit like that. Less like gross though. Less smelly. I don't know. I really liked this book, and I wrote down some quotes from this book too, actually, that I thought were interesting. And Adrian Tchaikovsky is interesting. I really like his writing so far. So something he says about, something that happens in the context of this occupation. He writes, of course, plenty of people disappeared across the archipelago. They just weren't there, and all reference to them was removed. Their name would only ever be found in one place, a carefully curated list of all the people who didn't exist and should not be mentioned. The list was necessary when prosecuting anyone gauche enough to mention them, because you had to have something to refer to know what it was to which nobody was permitted to refer. but these weren't executions. This was just the operation of perfection. This gives you a sense of what this, this occupation is like. And a big part of it is the language, and the language called Pell, which is being imposed on this city. And he describes this language Pell as bearing very little relation to the now extinct native Palicene, the original native language of those who are now colonially occupying this city. Pell is the perfect language, easy to learn, clear in meaning, the ideal means to communicate correct thought. To those conquered people under the sway, it is brutal, inflexible, impossible to turn against their conquerors, but only because they're novices to the tongue, though. The Palicene themselves are more than capable of freighting the simplest sentences with enough barbed subtext to sink a ship. There's very much a kind of linguistic theme to the politics in this book that I found very interesting. I really like Adrian Tchaikovsky a lot. I really liked this book. I don't think it's out yet, or it's out very, very recently. Not sure. That was an advanced one. Advanced reader copy. 2 books left. I have physical books to show you now. One that I think is going to take a while to talk about. I read Sacred Actions, Living the Wheel of the Year Through Earth-Centered Sustainable Practices by Dana O'Driscoll. Dana's the creator of the Tarot of Trees, the Tree Lore Oracle, the Archdruid of the Ancient Order of Druids in America. Dana is fantastic. And this is a book that looks at basically different ways to, lessen one's footprint on the environment, we could say. The description in the front says, introducing sustainable living practices through a Wheel of Year approach. So the Wheel of the Year is kind of the basis of the chapters. You could read a chapter at each of the kind of 8 points on a Wheel of the Year if you wanted to. I chose to just read it straight through. And so it kind of draws connections between earth-centered or earth-based spiritualities, like Druidry, but certainly many others, and, bringing that kind of earth-based spiritual orientation to things into everyday living. So it covers everything from kind of food waste to getting rid of your lawn, which I'm going to be doing this year, worm composting, reskilling, gardening, making, different things, making a root cellar, indoor gardening, creating sacred spaces. There's a chapter on spiritual tools and kind of eco-friendly spiritual tools. So there's some conversation there about kind of the issues, like ethical issues and environmental issues with things like crystals, or unethically harvested herbs, that are harvested in unsustainable ways, things like that. Transportation, different kinds of transportation, all kinds of topics. So lots of inspiration, I think. I definitely made a list in my page a day book of things that I thought of based on reading this book that I could do in my life and that my family and I could do in our life to make our house more environmentally friendly, which is always helpful. I feel like it's really hard, sometimes to come up with ideas like that are what I want to call like medium level ideas, like once you've done the kind of the most basic things, like getting rid of single-use plastic grocery bags from your life or something, like once you've done those very basic things, like what is there in between that and, growing all of your own food, which for the very, very vast majority of people is going to be completely impossible, right? Or really expensive changes like replacing appliances and, like these big, huge things, right? It's hard to find those medium things. And I think that this book in some of the chapters does a really good job of that. And so I really appreciated that. I really liked the chapters that I thought were the best, sacred actions in our homes. So this one has to do with like water usage and making gray water systems, which I also am thinking of doing in our house. Lighting, cooking, heating and cooling, all kinds of interesting ideas in that one. I also really liked the landscaping and gardening and lawn liberation chapter. Dana's a permaculture designer, I guess would be called. And so her knowledge of gardening and landscaping really shows in this chapter, and I really liked that one as well. So I got some good ideas there. I had some struggles with this book though, and I'm going to just be honest about that. I found some of the chapters would not be very applicable to very many people, even though I think that there was very much an intention to make them broadly applicable. Some of the chapters, I think that you would have a hard time finding something as an idea of something to do if you don't own a whole bunch of property. You know, for somebody who lives in an apartment with perhaps no lawn or yard of any sort, some of the chapters you would have a very hard time trying to find anything that you could feasibly do. Quite a lot of the changes, you know, are presented as being a lot more accessible than they actually are. You know, some of these, building and living in a straw bale house, you know, is just not is not within the bounds of reasonable, I don't think, for most people, for all kinds of reasons, right? And a lot of the ideas, I think, are contingent on having particular amounts of resources and particular kinds of mobility and particular kinds of access to particular things that are not anything even remotely close to universal, not even remotely close to universal in, like, on this continent, like, not even close. So I thought that that was really challenging. I think there's something in the book for everyone. I do. I think that there's probably an idea in the book that is applicable or useful to everyone, regardless of, you know, the size or type of dwelling that they have, regardless of what they're already doing currently. I think everybody would find something. I do think that a lot of the ideas, though, would be very hard if you don't have a lot of space and you don't have a lot of outdoor space, like, at your disposal that is yours. So I think that that is a major challenge of a book like this. I thought that the chapter on food in particular made some really strange assumptions about food that are, and like why people have the diets that they have and why people eat the things that they eat and how people should eat, that I think are unfounded. I'll say like are unfounded for sure. And questionable. And yeah, I think that sometimes it falls a little bit into choice discourse in a way that runs the risk of reinforcing the neoliberal idea that, like, lifestyle changes of individuals are going to save us from climate change. They're not. So, you know, as an example, I was a little bit, was put off by one particular part, and I'm not going to be able to find it. There's a part where she's talking about transportation, right? Oh, I did find it. And she's talking about choosing between living in a city where she would have kind of less privacy, less less green space, but she would be able to kind of walk everywhere, versus living outside of a city or outside of a town, having more privacy, more space, more green space to garden and grow and things like that, but needing to use like a fossil fuel dependent vehicle to get places, including get to work. And talks about this as kind of, you know, all of these things come down to choice, and it's like it just comes off to me in a way that is totally disconnected from, I would hazard to say the vast majority of people's living circumstances where, we don't have the luxury of just kind of sitting back and trying to decide, like, well, maybe I should buy a car, or maybe I shouldn't buy a car, or maybe I should buy this house, or maybe I should buy that house. Maybe I should move closer to work. Maybe I should move further away from work. Like, we're at a point economically where I know people in major cities in my province are giving up jobs that they like in big cities because they can't afford to live in the city where they work, right? And public transit infrastructure is so inadequate that, commutes are not doable. There's like all of these things, and it all comes down to money, right? It doesn't actually come down to choice. It comes down to money. And with transportation, you have to think about physical ability as well when you're talking about things like, cycling as a sole form of transportation or walking as a sole form of transportation. Obviously, the location where you live is not the only factor that is going to determine whether that's viable for you. The climate is going to be one, physical ability is going to be another, perhaps family size and needing to get children around is going to be another. There's a lot of things beyond choice. And so I think with a book like this, while I like that it focuses on, that things that people can do in their homes, at their workplaces, in their everyday life, and acknowledges very consistently, not all of these are going to be applicable to all people. That's okay. We can all do things from where we're at. We can all, improve our relationship to the earth. We can all work to be a more positive force, environmentally speaking, and less of a negative force, environmentally speaking. We can all do that no matter what situation we're in. I do think this kind of overemphasis on choice when we're talking about environmental catastrophe and preventing environmental catastrophe that we're already in is limited, right? Is inherently limited, and I think more acknowledgement of that is necessary, right? I don't think that's helpful when it leads people to this conclusion of, oh, well, it doesn't matter what I do in my everyday life because I'm just one person and it's not going to make a difference. Like, I don't think that that's helpful either, but yeah, the choice discourse is really frustrating for me. So, end rant. Now, I want to end off on a really, really good note. I liked this. I liked a lot about this, but big frustration as well. But I want to end off, I found a 5-star book. I read one 5-star book in January, my first 5-star book, and only one so far of 2023. I can already tell you the book I'm reading right now that's going to be in my February is going to be a 5-star book as well, but I have one 5-star read from January, and it is The Vegan Chinese Kitchen. Look at this. All of these Post-its, the signed Post-its are recipes that I would like to try. And the ones at the top are bookmarking different sections that I just thought were interesting. Or they're not recipes, but they're sections about different kinds of spices or different kinds of cooking implements or, more general things like that. This book is amazing. This book is interesting as a read cover to cover, I read it cover to cover. Not just for, there's lots of kind of cooking techniques and things like this that are interesting and useful and certainly necessary for me as somebody who's not really familiar with Chinese cooking, but there's these whole sections with these great photos and then that have pretty substantial amounts of text in them about different aspects of veganism in Chinese culture and history that introduce different, business owners or culinary teachers or different people like this in China who are relevant to veganism in China or plant-based eating in China. Different things about, farming and producing different ingredients. All kinds of things. This book is really great. This is a beautiful family picture. This is really good. frequently asked questions about tofu, all kinds of things in here. And so I have a grocery list made that I'm going to make 2 things of this next week. I will say, when I rate a cookbook 5 stars, I never base it at all, and this may seem weird to people. I never base it at all on like how recipes turn out when I make them, because I don't think it's fair to judge the book like based on whether I'm good at making the things in the book, if that makes sense. Certainly the recipes feel like they're written in a way that's easy to follow. They're written very clearly. The ingredients are written clearly. She also spends some time talking about kind of how to put different dishes together and make a meal out of different dishes, because the way that it's designed is kind of that you would make 2 or 3 dishes and that would comprise a meal, not just one. So I think that this looks really good. This is really, really good. If you're into Chinese food, or if you're into vegan food, or if you're into both of those things, or if you would like to try being open to those things, then check out The Vegan Chinese Kitchen, my favorite book of the month. 5 stars. That is my books of January 2023. 46 minutes. Am I ever glad that I didn't put this into my recap? I told you it was going to be a long one. Well, you knew it when you clicked on it. If you made it this far, I don't know what you're doing, but I hope you had a good time, because I did. I'm really looking forward to sharing my February books with you. For February, I will be participating in Blackathon, Readathon for Black History Month. I'll put a link below to the video by Jessie of Bowties and Books, who puts together this readathon every year. It's the 5th one. Jessie's also the creator of these wonderful TBR cards, which I've shown on my channel before. And so the readathon has different themes, and they're organized into different teams with different prompts to do. And so I have chosen TBR for February, for Blackathon specifically, of 5 books. I'm halfway through the first one. It's 5 stars, I can already tell you. I'm really, really excited to talk about those at the end of February. Maybe I'll make a reading vlog. I don't know. I've never made a reading vlog before, but I really like watching other people's, so maybe that will happen. Maybe I'll make just a dedicated readathon video in February. We shall see. I'm really excited about it though, and I've got some other books on my pile as well that I'm looking forward to. So what did you read in January that you loved? Tell me down below. I would love to hear about it. Have you read any of the books that I talked about? Let me know what you thought. I'll see y'all again soon. Have a good one. Happy reading. Bye.